I personally take a liberal or libertarian stance on trans issues. I believe that we shouldn't have any legal ramifications or legal laws banning trans people. So this puts me kind of in a neutral state. Now, socially, I think that trans people should respect normal people and normal people should respect trans people. I just think that we shouldn't force one or the other, either party, to bend to the will of the others. So for normal people, this would mean that normal people do not have to legally or socially respect pronouns if they don't want to. It might mean that they're a dick, but they shouldn't be required to. On the other hand on things, I think that people should not be able to enforce their will upon trans people, and I think that trans people should be allowed to be free to pursue whatever lifestyle they want to, so long as they're not harming anyone. So, what is your
Oh,
position on this?
oh man, I want to interview you now so bad.
Oh, really?
Sorry, we're kind of close, although we have some positive obligation disagreements. So generally speaking, I think I don't really care to answer the question ontologically of if a trans woman is a woman. I care much more about what I would consider like the medical and societal treatment of these people and how to make them like live a fulfilling life and like a happy life where that won't lead to negative outcomes like suicide. Um, and I think that's the goal we should be looking towards, and that very clearly transition seems to be the only treatment that has any reduction in suicide or depression or anxiety or any of these symptoms. So that's usually the route I would say we should be going because it's just the best solution we have at the moment for these people. I think that societally that means some amount of legislation for their protection of their rights because if you don't do it, social pressures and social and peer pressure will negatively impact these people. So, for instance, the reason I said I would love to interview you is because you said you don't think that you use normal. I'm going to use cis because I'm woke like that.
Oh, damn.
um, it's fine. I don't care. I know some trans people who get really mad about that though.
Yeah.
It's fine. It does not matter to me. I think that a lot of trans people would really balk at that specifically because misgendering is something that causes severe, you know, psychological pain to trans people, generally speaking, when they get misgendered. And I think that if you look at things like the suicide statistic, like the self harm rates, these are things we need to mitigate. So we need at least social pressure and social obligations not to misgender. I don't know if I'd ever extend that into law, except for maybe in in professional capacities. So like a teacher can't misgender their student would be like one where I'd be like, yeah, you're taking charge of this child for 8 hours a day. If they're transgender and it's been medically diagnosed and all that, and transition has begun, you need to respect that. But I think as a society, we should pressure people to use the pronouns that someone like wants them to use. I
Okay.
treat it
Yeah.
sort of like someone choosing their name. Like if I changed my name to John, I would think that other people would be people should be like, yeah, you should call him John if that's what he changed his name to.
Okay, yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah, I do think we agree mostly on this because I believe in social power and like the evolution of society. So I think that if we use society to pressure new norms, that is a much more effective and elastic way to gain cultural evolution. And I think that the law will sometimes block this. But I also think that using law too often can come with dangerous ramifications, and that's why I think it's good because I think most people just want to live and let live. And maybe that's like an overly optimistic view on the world, but that's just the way I see things. I think that most people are peaceful. I think that most people don't want to enact violence on others. Now, many people disagree with me on this, but I think that if we use society as a way to, let's see, guide behavior, that's much more effective and less coercive than using law. So I think that it's a good idea to, yeah, like slowly over time, there's going to be people who won't respect trans people. And most people, I would think, will respect trans people. Now, they'll probably disagree with them, but they'll just have a live, let live attitude.
I think within certain bounds, that's true. So I think that if someone is not too different, most people have that live let live attitude, but I think there are certain lines that people won't cross. For instance, I know a trans person who's actually in the server who lives in like deep rural Louisiana, and like she can't go outside dressed up as a woman. Otherwise, like she runs the risk of being assaulted on the daily. Like it's just not an option for her, right? Um, so in certain instances, I do agree with you, but I think there's kind of limits to how far that live and let live mentality goes for most people.
Okay. Well, see, I think the law would support us in this regard. So,
Oh, there,
um,
absolutely, the law
yeah. So,
would, but
like,
I'm just saying that
yeah.
I don't agree necessarily that societal pressure is always going to be enough. I think it's the place you should usually start when you're looking at these kinds of changes. But like for the professional capacity, I think we should instantly be legislating that because if we entrust someone with like a child, like an educator with a child, I think they should by law be required to just follow whatever medical guidelines say should be the case, right? And medical guidelines right now are very clear about like how you should treat someone who is transgender.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so grant me this. Let's just say, and trust me, I think that our police enforcement and our military enforcement are lackluster to say the least. Definitely not like incredibly high capacity at their jobs. But if you grant me this, that we had a really, really well functioning security system that stopped a mass majority of violence. Do you see any other problems besides violence that would occur in society?
Well, like I said, misgendering of children, for instance, would be one. Um, but because that kind of psychological harm, like, so for instance, there's a reason that like stalking is illegal, right? Even though technically you could stalk someone and they could never even know, right? Because there's certain kinds of harms that we are willing to say like this is bad enough that we should stop it. That being said, again, I don't know if misgendering just like out in public is one we like can or should try and like stop with the law. That's a much harder question. I probably don't think we should, and I definitely don't think we can because it would violate First Amendment protections pretty obviously. I assume you're American. I don't know. You could be Canadian,
Yeah,
but I
I'm
assume
American.
yeah. Okay, yeah. Um, but
Okay.
that's probably like I said, the big thing is I think in professional capacities we could and should legislate this, but publicly speaking, the only thing we can do is social pressure realistically in the United States.
Okay. Okay.
Like
So
in like,
let's get into the social side of things because
sure.
I was just talking to some paleo conservatives.
Oh boy.
So yeah, so they had some differing opinions on this topic, but they have the idea that we should socially I disparage might be too strong a word. How about socially reject transgenderism? I think they believe that we should socially reject transgenderism because this goes against biblical doctrine and it goes against their cultural values.
Yep.
What do you think about this?
Um, I'm trying to find the way to say it in the not mean way, but
Not mean way.
so I personally am like I'm a progressive liberal in sort of the classical sense of that word, where I very firmly think if you can't show that this is a harm to someone else or to the person doing it, I'm not sure why we should ever tell them they can't do something, especially when we know it's beneficial to them, at least psychologically. So I kind of would just tell them to pound sand, right? Is the polite way of saying it, because I just don't think that kind of ideological concern should ever be running around in government. That kind of like, this is what I believe should be the right way to do things, or it should be running around in society even. If you wanted to do it inside your own family, I think I'd have to allow you to. But even then, I'd probably say you're very close to the line to abusing your own children. Like if a paleoconservative person has a trans child, like that child is running like a 40% suicide risk because of who their parents are, basically. Like that is just the case. I consider it sort of like when a Jehovah's Witness parent refuses blood transfusions because their religion bans it. So a lot of the time, children die in this religion because they can't undergo surgery because they can't have a blood transfusion. I would consider a paleoconservative doing this to a trans child to be roughly the same thing, where they're unnecessarily endangering their child.
Okay. I'll provide some pushback on that
Yeah.
issue just because I think that while I understand what you're saying, I do see a distinct difference between something like a blood transfusion and an indirect. So that would be more of like a direct cause of death and an indirect cause of death. So like for example, let's say a Christian household that raises their children with strong Christian values. Um, I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be. What is the word? Nefarious for the parents to stop their child from transitioning, or I guess delivering on that, let's say, trans education. I don't think that would be a nefarious act because they might be working in the interest of what they think is good for their child.
Well, so to be clear, the Jehovah's Witness in this case, usually they're saying, "Oh, this child can undergo this surgery, but if too much blood, spills out, or if it goes too long, they're going to die because I won't allow the transfusion." So I would consider this not to be the primary cause of death, right? Because the surgery is usually the cause of death. But
Okay.
in this case, my counter question is, okay, how would you feel about a family that forces their child to transition because they think it's in the best for that child? Like they take just a child who's cis, normal, as you would say, and they force them to transition, right? Because that's their religion says this is what you do with the second son, is you force them to transition. Would you still feel the same way?
Interesting. So the distinction I would see here is the positive case and the negative case. I would see the negative case
Well,
being
mhm.
I would see the negative case being that you are, let's say, preserving your child's natural state as they grow up to an adult, and then when they become an adult, then they can do what they want with their body. But in a positive scenario where they force their child to do something that could have long term ramifications, don't you see the distinction there?
Well, no, because I think you're basically doing the same thing. You're forcing the child to undergo the puberty they don't want to, and you're forcing their body to endure hormone effects they don't want to. Right. One of them does require external intervention in terms of hormones that their body is not generating. But I, generally speaking, don't assent to that kind of natural divide of human actions. I think human actions are natural. So I think that if you live in a society where the capacity to be trans exists, medically speaking, and transition, I think that it is natural for someone who has that like dysphoria to do that. So I think that both parents are intervening to force the puberty the child does not want upon them in this case.
Okay, interesting. Okay. I'm curious about your philosophical foundations on this because I think I've
Mhm.
identified that you happen to believe in moral imperatives?
Yeah, yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah,
That makes
not
sense. That
not in
makes
the
sense
usual
then.
sense.
Okay, well how would you distinguish yourself from the usual sense?
1 second, sorry. I'll be right.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, sorry, back. So most people, when they're looking at moral imperatives, they're going to try and ground them in very broad, like big principles. I am generally not doing that. I will generally argue that the thing that you should be centering is the injustice you experience in a situation. And that's an important distinction between me and a lot of people because a lot of people will try to accuse me of being inconsistent when what I'm being consistent to is my experience rather than to a broad principle. And I think that's just something I would like to note here because I think that's much more important when it comes to actually acting in the world than like these weird overarching principles some people try to construct. So that's the sense in which I'm different when it comes to moral imperatives for most people.
Okay, so in that case, you said an injustice is being done to you, if I said that correctly. What would be an
Uh,
example of this?
Well, so when you experience an injustice, not when one is being done to you, right? So I would argue that I experience an injustice if I see a child being hit in front of me, right? This isn't something being
Hmm.
done to me, but I'm experiencing an injustice. I can see it and I know it's wrong. Um, so ask your question again. Sorry, I heard that and did not continue listening because I prepped that answer in my
No, that was
brain.
good because I asked for examples, so you provided an example.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good.
Um, okay, so here's what I'll say on this. Well, you already heard my stance on morality. I don't believe morality exists, but beyond that, even if morality did exist, what I'm interested in is the let's see, the larger impact or the ripple effect of what a moral imperative means. I think that if you commit yourself to moral imperatives, it leads to absurdity because there's no way of justifying a line to stop yourself.
Um, so that's kind of where I think my system will get out of that, because I can always stop myself when I feel that what I'm doing is no longer just right. When it no longer appears or feels just, I'm no longer tied to continue doing it. Right. So like you
Okay,
can't
wait.
trap me with like a utility monster or something because I'll just be like, oh, in that situation, it's not just anymore.
Okay, interesting. Wait. So let me so you believe on acting in situations that you disagree with, right?
No, not always. I would argue that there are situations I disagree with where there isn't something unjust occurring here, and that these are qualitatively different than ones where something unjust is occurring. So where let's say that there's a dad whose son is playing baseball, all day in the sun, and the son wants to get like just a bottle of water from the ice cream truck, right? And the dad's like, nope, you're not allowed because we have water at home. I would disagree with that decision, right? Provided like I know this family circumstance and I know they're not like destitute or something, right? But I would not call that immoral or unjust. Um, on the other hand, if I saw a kid lose his baseball game and he goes to his dad and the dad smacks him, I would be like, this is unjust and I'm going to intervene. This is somewhere where it's not just that I disagree with you, you have done something wrong.
Okay, so in both of those instances, harm is being committed. So what causes you to act in one scenario and not the other?
Whether or not I feel like an unjust action has occurred, right? So I don't think that the child who is being refused the water is experiencing some suffering due to that. So he's being harmed in some way because he's probably really thirsty after playing in the sun all day. But I don't think anything immoral is occurring here or unjust. Like if I've experienced this, I'm using situations here that I've basically experienced. um, and just you don't get that feeling of injustice from it at all. You don't feel that it's wrong, or like most people don't. They're just like, oh, I would have given him a bottle of water. It's kind of yeah. But if you
Oh,
see a
okay.
dad like hitting a child,
Okay.
you will be like, oh, that is a serious problem. That's something that is not just. And what's nice about these kinds of examples is that you don't need to experience them, and you don't need to feel them to know they're unjust. You can just be like, oh yeah, I would agree that is unjust.
Okay. It sounds like when you say unjust, you are referring to your moral system. Is that accurate?
No, to the quality of the experience. So this isn't systematic. This is directly something you have to encounter in experience.
Okay, so you make a distinction between your personal morality and a justice or an injustice.
Personal morality and yeah, I would argue most people have certain moral obligations or moral rules for themselves that aren't going to align with what is qualitatively just or unjust.
Okay, wait. So then, would this still be a moral imperative if it's not grounded in your morality but your sense of justice?
I think so because you would consider someone who doesn't do it evil, right? If you saw,
Yeah.
some like 6'4" guy watch a child get beaten by his dad, you would consider this person to be a bad person. Um, and you would consider that they have a duty to like or an imperative to step up and stop the beating.
Okay, wait. I could be wrong about this, but it sounds like you're not even referring to objective morality. This just sounds like a value system.
Um, Depends on what you mean by objective. Depending on who I'm talking to, I get accused of being a anti-realist or a realist. So the best way to describe this is I would argue that it is, regardless of any stance that any individual takes, immoral to commit murder within like the United States. Murder is a bad word there because murder implies immorality already. To kill someone in the United States outside of situations of self-defense, it is immoral to do that because of the cultures, norms, attitudes in that society. That morality exists there. But there are societies we could envision where killing someone is not immoral, and we know because they've existed in the past, right? So, for instance, in Genghis Khan's Mongolia, if you were not a Mongolian, I forget the word for an adult Mongolian. Basically, if you weren't an adult Mongolian, it was not considered immoral to kill you. Like even like children, it was like, oh, if you killed them, well, you just got to pay the money. Like you just broke someone's property. That was the way it was treated.
What the hell?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay, so that's interesting. So, would you say that morality is grounded in culture or democracy?
It's a little more complicated than that. Culture is probably as close as you'll get, though.
Well, let me just ask.
Um,
Let me just ask directly. What is your moral system?
do you mean my meta ethical position, or because my applied ethics are about what you experience? Where I think that arises is mostly cultural with some biology.
So when you refer to a moral imperative,
Yeah.
what system are you referring to there? What ethical framework?
What ethical framework specifically? Oh man. I mean, so I'm using Dewey's pragmatic theory of ethics when I'm talking here, which
Okay,
is not exactly well known. So I know that doesn't help. Sorry. Um,
that's okay.
the reason I keep going back to experience is because Dewey thinks this is the only place you can actually find anything. So when we're talking about a system, the system is if you feel something unjust or immoral is occurring, then an imperative arises to rectify it in you. Right? This is all internal to the person. But where
Okay, but
these arise from is
this seems like an is.
it is and is. Yeah.
Okay, it's not an ought though. It's an is, right?
Well, no, it's automatically an ought because it's a psychological state, right? Psychological states automatically come with oughts because psychological states arise in order to, motivate behavior.
But is it grounded in your personal motivation, or is it grounded in something independent of your motivation?
Independent. The ought is grounded in your motivation. The is usually grounded in culture and biology,
Okay,
right?
so
So the ought
this sounds like a practical form of ethics instead of an objective form of ethics.
sort of, like I said, the reason some people say I'm not an anti-realist is because no matter what stance you take, it is immoral to do certain actions in certain places, right? Like to kill someone in the United States outside of self-defense is always immoral. And that's almost true of almost every country in the world right now. Right? That's
Can I
just,
ask
or
you
to like
why?
steal. Why? Because of the cultures, norms, institutions, and attitudes of the United States.
So
Right? They,
cultural
they construct a
relativism.
real morality. Sort of, yeah. They construct a real morality. So the difference between my position and most cultural relativisms is I think that once you're inside of another culture, you are bound by their morality. You no longer you no longer get to appeal to the relativism to get out of it. If you've traveled to be inside the United States and you're from India, you don't get to. I don't know. Well, let's use it the other way. If you travel from the United States to India, you don't get to like kill a cow just because in the United States that's considered perfectly fine, right? In India, no, this is immoral, and you're going to be punished because you've done an immoral act. And I think that's a true immoral action that you've taken by going to India and killing a cow.
Okay, interesting. The reason I was trying to figure out, I might have lost my train of thought because you went in deep,
It's
but
okay.
I think,
Take a time. Take a minute.
yeah. So yeah, basically, I asked you moral imperative, and then I think what I was trying to get towards is the line that you need to draw because the way I see it is that if you require yourself to act in certain situations that do not involve you, you're then opening a can of worms that you then have to follow through to the logical extent. So if you have
Well,
to,
sorry, continue. Sorry.
yeah, no problem. So if you have to, if you are required to save a child that is 10 feet away from you and he's drowning, then you also have to save that child if he's 15 feet away from you and drowning. And so the question is, at what point across the world do you no longer have the requirement to save him if it's within your means? So like if you know you can save him and you have to make a 16-hour drive, are you still required to save him? And if not, why?
Well, so it's when the experience of injustice dissipates, right? So for some people, this experience is much more compelling, which is why you get like people flying to Africa to do Doctors Without Borders or to do like build houses for the poor or like working in soup shops every day. But for some people, it basically doesn't occur when the child is out of sight, right? So the imperative is psychological. Remember, it's not the imperative is not the objective part here. The objective part is the imperative, the ought arises when you experience injustice. So if you like know there are starving children in Africa, but you don't feel that there's an injustice occurring by you not helping them, then effectively there is no injustice occurring because probably in your experience you will find the injustices occurring that like they aren't getting enough aid or something like that. In which case you have an imperative to vote for someone who will give them more aid or to maybe donate to a charity, right? But when you start looking at like extreme burdens on people, what'll happen in your experience is you'll find actually the reason this feels absurd is because an injustice is being committed upon me if I'm required to 24/7 be driving in my car looking for drowning children, right? This is actually unjust to my situation and my experience of life. So this is why we can always curtail these kinds of absurdities when we appeal to experience.
It's interesting because I follow something like this. I wouldn't call it an ethic, but what I do, I just call it a value system. And what it means is, you could use the word morality interchangeably without it. And this does sound like a subjectivism, but you can correct me after. The way I operate is that I don't see things as moral because I can't ground morality in anything. But what I see is that I value certain things, and one of the things I value is the safety and security of the people that I care about. And so if I see them in trouble, I will act on that and save them, even if it comes at a cost to me, because I value the preservation of their life. So it would this be like a type of subjectivism if it's based in experience?
A little bit, although I would argue there are because of the fact that we are humans raised in similar cultures, it's not quite subjective. It's more intersubjective. right? So most of those values you're going to appeal to aren't ones you like ex nihilo created in your brain. They're probably ones you were educated and indoctrinated into having by your society.
Okay. So would you say that other people also must comply with your morality?
They must comply with the morality of society, not with your specific morality. Like, so let's say that I don't know, I read the Iliad a lot when I was in high school. So I feel a very strong sense of like duty to my country. I don't think that other people necessarily have to go as far as like say I read it a bunch and I got really rah 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 and I went and joined the military and like died for my country because I was like this is my moral duty. I don't think someone else who had a slightly different experience is required to go nearly as far. They're required as much as the country requires them to like pay taxes and be a member of society, but the country doesn't require them all to like join the military and die in service of the nation, right? So like there's sort of a general set of bounds that your society or your culture imposes that everyone has to play within, but you are allowed to go more extreme in certain ways and less extreme in others as long as it's within the bounds of your culture. So I would say intersubjective is the best word to describe it.
Okay, interesting. And so you would say that because people have a duty to the culture, they also have a duty to acting positively to preserve the safety of the people in the culture, such as like trans people?
Well, sorry. So you don't have a duty to the culture. This is a psychological state that humans will have. Right.
Will
I'm making a
have. Okay, so
descriptive
it
claim here,
is.
not a prescriptive claim. I'm making a descriptive claim about the way humans operate.
Okay, because
Um,
morality is an ought.
I disagree. I think
You
morality is much more
disagree.
about is. Yeah, I think much more morality is much more about is than ought.
What does
Um,
morality
all,
mean to
all,
you?
what is right and wrong is right.
Right and wrong based on.
So right and wrong tends to be based on your enculturation and education. There are certain other places it can come from, like biological imperatives do exist, right? So, for instance, babies are instantly don't like violence, and it takes a lot of enculturation to break that. Actually, you can do it. We know these societies have done it, like Sparta, Mongolia, Persia did it. The Ottoman Empire did it. You can enculturate someone out of that, but it is a lot of work to do that. So there are certain biological ones, but mostly culture.
Okay, interesting. Um, I was about to ask you something, but
Sorry, you brought it back to trans issues, and I forget how. I'm terrible about that. I'm sorry because
oh
you
no, no,
two
it's
part
cool, it's
question me.
cool.
If you two part question me, I will forget.
Oh no, no, it's cool, it's cool, it's cool. What I was gonna say is, as far as right and wrong go, um, this seems a bit confusing to me because if I were to say right and wrong to me mean correct and incorrect and like I
Hmm.
guess good and bad in a way.
Okay,
Well,
sorry. Yeah, we can substitute when I said right and wrong. I mean good and bad or good and evil. We
okay,
can
good and bad,
substitute
good
for
and
that.
bad, good and bad.
Yeah, yeah.
That's good. That's
If
good.
that helps, yeah.
So when I think of good and bad, I think of good and bad in favor of something specific. So you would say that the actions of something good and bad are grounded in what?
Culture mostly, like I said.
Culture. Okay.
Yeah. So you're the way these values are transmitted is what we call enculturation and education. And that is generally speaking what's going to tell you what is good and bad. But like I said, you do biologically come preloaded with certain goods and bads, and violence is one of those ones where babies respond very poorly to violence instantly, and if you don't try and change that, it will remain their entire life.
Okay. So how do you get around? Surely you don't believe that culture morality is always correct, right?
It's always correct with respect to itself.
As in, like it happens.
Yeah, I'm almost being entirely descriptive here. The only time I get pseudo, I call it pseudo prescriptive, is when we talk about oughts, but I'm talking about them in terms of psychological states because I think psychological states automatically motivate you to action to relieve them, with the exception of oh god, what's the word? Eudaimonic ones.
Hmm.
Those are the only ones that don't motivate you to action straight away. And eudaimonic ones can even motivate you to action, but usually that action is sustainment rather than motivation of the removal of the psychological state.
Okay. So, uh, so what is the culture trying to accomplish when people act good or bad? Like, what is something good for culture? Is it to like
Oh,
preserve that culture, or is it like going towards some ends?
It depends on the culture. Certain cultures are highly self-destructive. Most of them are very much trying to preserve themselves. Although you get weird replication where, like, if you go 2 generations ahead, most cultures are pretty well. This is a very modern issue because if you look in like the Middle Ages, it's not true. But in modern times, culture is acting more to destroy itself than it is to preserve itself, in the sense that it's just rapidly changing. Right, cultural norms just shift crazily over the last roughly 130, 40 years. But prior to that, culture was very much about its preservation, right? The entire point of culture was to preserve and educate and enculturate your culture's values to your next generation. And that was the only thing your culture tried to do. So I don't think cultures have natural ends. I think they're very much just, they just kind of do what they do, is the best way to describe it. But I also don't really believe in natural ends in that sense.
Okay, okay. So my only question would be why would you conflate aughts with describing the way culture operates?
I think this is what people mean when they try to talk about oughts. They just don't know it. So when someone is trying to describe, like, you ought to do something, they're talking about something they've been educated and enculturated to believe. They just don't understand that fact usually. They usually are they try to appeal to something transcendental or transcendent, and they try to make a claim that, this is like objectively true for all time. And I don't think that bears out historically or realistically.
Okay, wait, this almost sounds like a type, I forget what it's called, but it sounds like one of the three subcategories of anti-realism. Do you know what I mean?
I talked to Lance Bush enough that I should remember these words, but I don't remember them anymore.
So there's emotivism, and then there's two more, and I think you were sort of hinting at one of those other two, where it's like, it's this idea that when people are talking about oughts, they're in fact implying certain duties or obligations or beliefs or values that they hold. That's what they mean when they say oughts.
Certain things that you should, kind of. In some cases, they will be saying this when they say ought. Yeah, in certain cases. I think you're thinking of, is that quasi-realism or fictionalism?
It's something else. It's
Prescriptivism maybe. Oh God, it's been so long.
I'm looking. Gotta go back to that old chart.
I think it is prescriptivism is the one you're thinking of. I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think in certain cases, when someone says you ought do something, that when they're talking about morals and they say you ought do something, that is what they're saying, kind of. Although I would argue more what they're doing is they're trying to enculturate you. When someone, so let's say, what's an easy example? Oh God, I'm trying to think of an easy example here. Let's say there's a war on and you don't want to sign up to go fight for your country. When someone says you ought, like, join the army and go fight for your country, what they're trying to do there is not like give you some universal law. They're trying to get you into the culture that believes this is a war worth fighting for. That's what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to motivate you to a belief, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah. So we're basically on the same page. So you're basically a motivist, right?
No, no, because emotivism. Well, no, because emotivism implies there's no truth values here, and I think there are truth values here, right? Ayer is very clear about this in basically all of his books. Emotivism is a non-cognitive position by definition, and I think they're very much.
I was under the impression. Oh, hold on. Because non-cognitivism is the idea that morality is not truth apt, and so
correct.
I was going under the impression that this is anti-realism as a branch of non-cognitivism, but like
no.
I know people are all over the place about like where anti-realism lies. So
anti-realism is an umbrella above that. Non-cognitivisms are can be a type of anti-realism. I don't think they can be a type of realism. I don't think you could be a non-cognitive realist. Maybe you could. I don't know.
Okay, so non-cognitivism branches off anti-realism.
Yes. Yeah, it's a type of anti-realism because there are cognitive anti-realists.
Would you say it's inverted for the other side?
Say again?
Would you say it's inverted for the other side? So would you say that realism branches off cognitivism or cognitivism branches off realism?
Well, there are cognitivist schools of realism and cognitive schools of anti-realism, right? Because there are anti-realist schools that will argue that moral statements are truth apt, that they're just not stance independent.